Windows installation. So in this chapter, we're going to be looking at modern operating systems from a Windows perspective, of course, disk management, and then the installation process for Windows. We'll kind of just briefly go over that, but that's another one of those things where you kind of have to do it in order to get a hang of it. So what I would advise doing is, if you have a computer that you can work with, install a hypervisor like we just talked about. And I can one example of that would be VMware Workstation Player. So this is a free hypervisor that you can download. To do a Google search for it, you download this hypervisor on your computer, and then go to Microsoft's website and download the trial version of Windows 10. You install the you set up a virtual machine, which is pretty straightforward. You just kind of follow the on-screen prompts. But if you need help, I can just reach out to me. I can help you with that part. But you create a virtual machine, power the virtual machine on for the first time, and along with the Windows image, the Windows install files that you download from Microsoft's website, and it'll start walking you through the process of building a Windows machine. You probably can also find some how-to guides on how to do that if you do some searching around the internet, and they'll have screenshots and stuff. So, like, matter of fact, it's a quick one. Windows 10 how to install. How to. Yeah, here's a video right here. That's the download there. Here's a fresh, clean installation of Windows 10. Let's see if we got images. It'll take forever. So then, that's how to add the pictures. Walking through the process. You can see the screenshots and stuff on how that process is done. Windows 10 installation is not that complicated. If you've never done any older operating system installs before, then you know that it's way easier, because in the older versions of Windows, like XP, everything was text-based, so you couldn't use your mouse and keyboard. So this, you can point and click on things, so it's way easier. All right, so that'll help you get some experience with that, but we'll look at some of the settings involved in that installation process. All right, a couple of terms that you need to be familiar with when it comes to modern operating systems. The first one is multi-use. All your modern operating systems allow you to have more than one user account on your device. So it's super beneficial, because each one of those user accounts is in its own sandbox, and unless that user account is an administrator, all of your individual user stuff is protected from everybody else's. It keeps everything segmented. So that's one benefit of a modern operating system, the ability to have multiple users. Multitasking is another benefit. So multitasking means that your computer can run multiple applications at the same time. Computers were first invented. They can only handle processing one program's data at a time. Now you can have like 20 programs running at a time on your computer if you've got enough resources for that, and it'll run just fine. So that's another benefit of modern operating systems. Multi-processing is also a benefit. Now, instead of having a single CPU, physically or logically, a lot of your computers can support multiple physical processors, especially when you're talking about servers. You have servers that have like 32 physical processor chips in them, right? But in addition to having multiple physical processors, let's say you're dealing with like a desktop or a laptop computer which only has room for like one CPU, that one CPU can have multiple cores. Each one of those cores acts as a logical processor. So even though I might have one physical chip, my operating system is able to treat that CPU chip as if it's 2, 4, 8 CPUs, because it has multiple cores, and it allows multiple processing. It allows your system to run as if it had multiple CPUs. Multi-threading is the ability to take a thread of data and process a thread of data simultaneously with other threads of data. In older operating systems, you could only process one thread of data at a time. With multi-threading, you can process down multiple threads simultaneously. All of these things combined together, all these features, allow modern operating systems to be more efficient, faster. They just give you a lot more benefits. The basic functions of an operating system. So overall, the basic job of an operating system is to act as a manager. It manages the interactions between the user and your apps in the hardware. So it plays middleman between a user and all of the stuff that's running in software and hardware on your computer. The OS also provides a way to structure the things that you store on your computer. It provides you with what they call a file system. So here they have a picture of a filing cabinet, and the way that Microsoft provides the comparison of how they create their file system is basically built off of the way a file cabinet works. Think of your hard drive as the file cabinet. Think of the folders in your file cabinet as like folders in Windows. And inside of those folders, I have other folders and have actual file documents. So it's the same concept that you would use in the real world that you use for the file system inside of your Windows operating system. But without that OS on there, there's no way of organizing all of the stuff that you could potentially save in there. So the OS provides that file system. The OS also enables the user to interact with software and hardware. So it gives you a user interface to actually, you have a command line interface, a CLI. You also have a GUI, a graphical user interface. That's the one that most of us are more accustomed to using. That's the one where you can point and click on little icons. But in the background, those clicking on that icon is running a code that says, open up this file, open up this program. And then the OS also allows you to locate applications and load them up into RAM. Every time you launch a program on your computer, a small portion of your memory is consumed in order to allow that program to stay open, even if you minimize it, and allow you to run multiple applications. So without RAM, we couldn't do multitasking. So that's part of that whole thing. The more RAM you have, the more applications you can load up, but still it's the operating system saying, okay, this program is trying to open up, I'm going to allocate this much RAM to it so that it can stay open and running, even if it gets minimized and pushed to the background as another application launches. The operating system that you need to be concerned with for the exam are Windows 7 through Windows 10. So that's going to be 4 ones, Windows 7, 8, 8.1, and Windows 10. Windows 7 was an upgrade from older versions XP and Vista. Windows 8 was an attempted, and 8.1 as a matter of fact, were attempts to replace Windows 7, but they both fell flat. They both had some issues. Windows 8 was too geared towards mobile devices. So they took away some really important feature, the start button. So people really didn't like that, which is why they had to come out with 8.1, which the major difference was they brought back the desktop and the start button feel that people had grown accustomed to in Windows. And then Windows 10 is basically like all the lessons they learned from Windows 7 plus the lessons they learned from Windows 8 combined together into an operating system. But in addition to being able to run on our computer, it can run on tablets and IoT devices, embedded devices. In systems, compatibility, budget restraints. So there's things that you have to think about before you choose what operating system you want to go with. Even hardware requirements, you got to think about those things when picking an operating system. Example to get for the computer. If your customer that you send the OS for had a bunch of software that they just commercially buy, then more than likely the software is going to be for one of the major commercial operating systems, which are Windows or Mac OS. Ubuntu is a version of Linux. Linux is open source. Usually with Linux, the software that you run on it is also going to be open source. But if they're using off-the-shelf stuff, that means it's going to be commercial. It's going to be like from Best Buy or directly from the manufacturer. So it probably won't be designed to, well, it may not be designed to run on Linux, to be run on one of these other operating systems. So that could help guide your decision. Does the customer use customized applications that are programmed for the specific customer? This is a really important one, because if that operating system was only designed to run, if that software was built and only designed to run on Windows 7, guess what? Even though Windows 7 is older, even though it's not supported anymore, they have to run Windows 7 because the software they got was designed to run for Windows 7. That doesn't mean it's going to run for Windows 10 correctly. So those are just some of the things you got to think about when choosing the operating system for a customer. From a hardware perspective, these are some of the requirements. These are like the bare minimum requirements in order to even install these operating systems. Windows, all of them across the board, Windows 7 through Windows 10, need to have a 1 gigahertz processor or faster. They all across the board need 1 gig of RAM for their 32-bit versions, and 2 gigs of RAM for their 64-bit. Again, across the board, they all need at least 16 gigs of free RAM to install the 32-bit version, and 20 free gigabits of RAM. Gigabits of hard drive space in order to install the operating system. The graphics card recommendations are the same. Windows 7 doesn't have any specifications for display. Windows 8.1 had a higher specification of resolution, but they reduced it in Windows 10 to make it more compatible with older displays. And then having the internet is necessary for all three. I mean, computers nowadays without the internet are useless. As far as architecture goes, your two choices are 32-bit versus 64-bit. The architecture is going to play a big role in the maximum amount of resources you're able to put into that system. If you have a 32-bit operating system, that operating system at max can only support 4 gigabytes of RAM. That's probably the biggest drawback. Besides 32-bit not having all the bells and whistles of 64-bit. It's this RAM cap. So what this means is I could physically have 8 gigabytes of RAM in my computer, but if it's running a 32-bit operating system, it will only ever use 4 gigabits of that RAM, and the rest of it will go to waste. So in order to take full advantage of your operating system, the best bet is to get a 64-bit OS, because then you can max out all of your components. It can handle 64-bit and 32-bit applications. And like I said, the big one is it has better support for higher levels of resources. You can check the compatibility of your operating system with different pieces of hardware, or specifically even software too, but this one is specifically for hardware, by using the compatibility checker that is provided by Microsoft. So before you upgrade operating system, you run this compatibility checker, and it'll scan your hardware, the hardware of your computer, and it'll tell you whether or not and that applications running on your system are compatible with 10, or if they're not compatible with Windows 10 and need to be upgraded. So this is something, if you're not currently on Windows 10, you got a machine that's on Windows 8 or 8.1 or even 7. This is recommended to run this scan to try to do an in-place upgrade. If you have a version of Windows 10 that is in what they call a upgrade path, Windows that is in a upgrade path for Windows 10, then you're able to do what we refer to as an in-place upgrade. That means that you don't have to wipe out the existing operating system or wipe out your existing data. You can just allow the operating system to step its way up to the latest and greatest version. It'll keep everything in place that you had on the system. Take it along to the newer version. You have to uninstall those, but for the most part, like your data and user accounts and all that stuff, that'll stay in place, and it'll just move you up to Windows 10. If your operating system, then you won't be in the upgrade path. So for example, if you have a Windows Vista or Windows XP computer, those systems are not in the upgrade path for Windows 10, at least for a direct upgrade. So you would have to do one of two things: either wipe the computer and then do a clean install, which means you basically get everything off of the hard drive and then install Windows 10 from scratch, or you could do a two-step upgrade where you upgrade from, say, Windows Vista to Windows 7, and then do an upgrade from Windows 7 to Windows 10, which will take longer, but at least it'll keep stuff in place. So there's a couple different ways you can approach that, but the upgrade path for Windows 10 is when it's some architecture. For example, I can't upgrade from Windows 7 32-bit to Windows 64-bit. I'd have to upgrade from 32-bit to 32-bit. So again, if you wanted to, get 64-bit, you'd have to wipe the computer hard drive, install the 64-bit of Windows 10 from scratch. For data migration, there's a couple of tools that you can use, and data migration is basically moving your data from one OS to OS. For that, you can use the user state migration tool, the USMT, which is a command line tool that kind of simplifies that process. In Windows 7, they also had a tool called Windows Easy Transfer. So you could use that to basically identify what you wanted to back up, and it's a little file that you could save on an external drive or something. And then once you installed your new OS, you could transfer that file to your new computer, and it'll restore your user profile and all the files that you identified. PC Mover Express is a tool for transferring selected files, folders, profiles, and applications from an old Windows PC to a Windows 10 PC. So that's another tool that you could possibly take advantage of. All right, so for installing Windows, when you install your operating system, it's important to remember that your operating system, even though it has some major, serves a major purpose on a computer, it's still a piece of software. And just like every other piece of software on your computer, it has to be stored on a drive, a hard drive. So two most common types of data storage, hard drive type of storage, in your today is going to be your hard disk drive and flash memory based drives like SSDs or even USB drives. When the storage device has been chosen, it must be prepared to receive the new operating system. So you get your storage device in there. Maybe you already have a storage device in your computer. In order to prep that storage device to get ready to hold a new OS, it has to be, if it's like a brand new drive, it has to be formatted first. It has to be partitioned and formatted. If you're doing a clean installation of Windows, the wizard, the program that helps you with that, will actually walk you through the process of partitioning and formatting the drive. But you get to make some decisions in how you're going to partition that drive. So there's two different methods. There's the older method called the master boot record method, and then there's the newer method, the GUID partition table method, or the GPT, MBR versus GPT. In the master boot record method, you had some limitations. For one, you could only partition or apart logically the hard drive into 4 primary partitions, or 3 primary partitions and 1 extended one. So what that means is that I could have, like, let's say I have 1 hard drive in my computer. I have a C drive, D drive, E drive, F drive, and then that's it. I couldn't make any partitions. But in a GUID partition table, I can break up that drive logically into up to 128 different little small parts, which is important because in GPT, you can support larger hard drives and larger drive partitions. So in master boot record, the biggest drive partition you can have is 2 terabytes, which, I mean, is a lot. But think about like a server or something like that. With that has, like, a server might have like 16 terabytes. Now, if I'm only making 2 terabyte, if I maxed out at 2 terabyte partitions, then I'm out of luck. I'm not gonna be able to utilize that entire drive. Versus GPT, I can have a maximum partition size of 9.4 zettabytes. A zettabyte is a 10 with 21 zeros behind it. So that's a huge amount of storage. And that's per partition. So this is 1 partition. And look, it says that we can have up to 128 partitions. So that's a crazy amount of storage. For MBR, there's no partition table backup. So there's no like disaster recovery. The GP it stores the partition table in a backup area, so you can recover from a fault. In MBR, the partition and boot data are stored in one place. In GPT, the partition and boot data are stored in separate drive locations. So that way, if something happens to the partition, the computer will still be able to boot up. Versus if you got any corruption in the MBR, the computer probably wouldn't even boot up correctly. And then MBR, any computer can boot MBR, but this is the one advantage of MBR. Any computer can boot it. And for GPT, computers must be UEFI based and run a 64-bit operating system to support GPT. So again, if you even if you have the hardware to run UEFI, if you install the 32-bit operating system, you can't use that GPT, the GPT partitioning method. UEFI is your upgraded BIOS, like the newer version of your BIOS. So if you want to take advantage of that newer version of BIOS, you have to use GPT. Overall, GPT partitions and logic. The primary partition, the operating system, and is usually the first partition. So for example, if I partition let's say I use GPT, the partition hard drive logically. The very first part that I select when I'm doing my operating system installation is going to be become the primary partition. The primary partition houses the files for your OS. So in Windows, that primary partition is usually your C drive. In MBR, we talked about the fact that you can only have 4 primary partitions, or 3 primary partitions and 1 extended partition. But we don't have that limitation in GPT. Extended partitions are partitions that are allowed to logically overflow into another partition. So even though maybe I have 2 physical hard drives in my computer, I can treat space between them as if they're one giant hard drive partition, even though they physically might be on different disks. So that's an example of an extended. A logical drive is when I have a physical hard drive, but then I partition it and I give a drive letter to each one of those partitions. So again, let's say I have my 1 hard drive and I partition it into 2 logical drives when I'm installing my operating system. The primary one becomes a C drive, but then the E drive is another logical drive. It's treated as a separate hard drive, but it's still physically part of that same hard drive. It's just treated like a different one. A dynamic disk can create volumes that span across more than 1 disks. So if I have this dynamic disk, I can do that. A basic disk is just like a partition. It can either be primary partition or extended partition, or it can be a logical drive, but it's only on 1 disk. In order to create that expansion, then I need multiple disks. Oh, sorry, dynamic. I need to create multiple span values. And then once I get ready to store data, so all these are just talking about how I'm logically going to break the disk into different chunks to save information, but to actually get ready to save data to it, I need to format each one of those partitions. The only file format that's available in Windows 10 is NTFS. That's the file format of choice for Windows, especially for your primary partitions. But there are other file formats that exist. So in older versions of Windows, they use a file format called FAT32. And that's kind of where some of the limitations got inherited for MBR. Look, you see the partition size up to 2 terabytes. And then it was used for XP in earlier versions of the operating system. NTFS can handle partition sizes up to 16 exabytes in theory. And NTFS has security built into it. So that's another added benefit. EXFAT, or FAT64, was created to address the limitations of FAT32 and NFS. And then this allows you to create a file system on USB drives, file systems on USB drives so that they can store data. And then one of the advantages here is you can support larger than 4 gigabyte flash drives. So with this, before this EXFAT, flash drives were limited to 4 gigs. Now you got 128 gig flash drives. Compact disk file system is your file system used to store data on optical drives. And NFS, or network file system, is your file system used to do network-based shares. Like if I have a shared drive on a server and I want to share it out over the network, it's going to be formatted using NFS so that it can be compatible with different operating systems. Installation and boot sequence. So for doing Windows installation, one of the important steps that you'll have is account creation. So this is after of course, after the operating system is already set up. You can create accounts and set them up so that they do single sign-on. Single sign-on is when you're able to log into a system once, and then those credentials are stored and then forwarded up to other resources so that you can log into those resources too, those other trusted resources. So you can enable it single sign-on if your organization has that, the back-end tools you need to make that work. And then that can make your sign-in process easier. Or you can create accounts directly in the operating system. If you do that, you got two options. You can create an account as an administrator, or you can create an account as a standard user account. The admin is like a manager. It can do whatever it wants on the system. A standard user is a restricted or limited user account. So it can only do certain things, like run programs, but it can install. After a Windows installation, or even on a regular basis, one of the things that you'll want to do is run Windows updates. So you can get to that by searching for Windows updates or going to the settings menu, and then inside of settings there's a section called update and security, and then you get the Windows updates there. By clicking on the check for updates button, it'll scan Microsoft servers and scan your computer to see what updates you're missing, and it'll trigger the download and install of those. Device Manager is another place you can go to do updates. We talked about that in a previous chapter. This Device Manager lists all of the hardware components inside of your computer system. And you can go there to update things like your drivers, those pieces of software that tell your CPU how to give commands to those pieces of hardware. Those drivers get updated on a regular basis as well, so you can go there and update them. But cool thing about Windows 10 updates is that a lot of those drivers, especially if they're for trusted hardware components, a lot of those driver updates get downloaded when you do your normal Windows update process. So unlike some older versions of Windows where you had to exclusively update the drivers separately from your Windows operating system, now they kind of loop them all together for the most part. And as long as you're running your Windows updates, you'll be like 80% covered with your driver updates too. All right, disk cloning. This is a way to customize your operating system, or to deploy your operating system en masse. What a clone is a copy. It's a copy of the operating system. Cloning helps you simplify the process of installing an OS on multiple computers. What you'll do is you'll set up one machine, get it all configured the way you want it configured, and then you clone it, and then that creates a file that you can then deploy to other machines. There's a couple of things that have to be clear before you clone a machine, typically, in order to make it more generic, and that's things like the SSID, not SSID, but the SID for the machine, which is like a unique identifier that every computer gets when you install the operating system. And there's some other pieces of information that might help uniquely identify that installation of the operating system versus other ones. You can clear all that stuff by running a process called sysprep, which is short for system preparation. It removes all of the unique settings from that computer clone, and then it gets it ready. It gets the image ready to be deployed to another machine. Once it's deployed to that other machine, though, that machine will pick up its own unique characteristics that will set it apart from the original clone, or from the source of the clone. Other ways that you can install operating systems besides cloning will be from the network. You can use a process called pixie booting, which basically means that you install a scaled down version of the operating system the Windows operating system onto that computer, which you connect to a system via the network, probably a server. From that server, you download this scaled down version of the operating system. The whole point of that scaled down version is to just give you a network card, a network connection. Once that network connection is established, you can then attach yourself to an imaging server that has all of those stored cloned images, and you can pull one down and install it on the computer. The benefit of the network installation is you can push down or pull down those images to potentially hundreds of machines all at the same network connection, and it provides for remote installations. Unattended meaning that you don't even have to have a human at that computer. If you push down the image to it, nobody has to be there. As long as the machine is online, the image will go down and it'll install. You also have what they call image-based internal partition installation. That's when you have a clean, like factory copy of the image already on a hard drive that you can revert back to if something happens. You can think of this as a factory reset. There's a partition, a section of the hard drive that's been blocked off by the hardware manufacturer or by the operating system, and they stored the out-of-the-box version of the operating system in there. And the version of the operating system you're using is in another partition. So if you ever need to revert back to a clean copy, you can just revert to that stored version of the operating system, and it'll basically do a factory reset. And then the other types are custom installation. This is just going to include the Windows Advanced startup options. You go in there, you can do a PC refresh, system restore, upgrades. So there's a bunch of other ones that you can use for like one-off repairs or installs. This is just giving you an example of the remote installation using Pixie. So this system is trying to boot up over the network, so it can do a Pixie boot. In order for that to work, you also have to have an unattended installation file, which is basically a configuration file that has a bunch of settings already set up in it. It has like things like the activation key with an operating system. It has the username and password for the account that you want to create by default on the system. Well, all those answers are included in a file, a script called unattended.bat, and it's included with the installation package. So when that system starts to install and it needs answers that a human would normally get, instead of waiting for a human to give those answers or give that input, it'll consult that script, and the script will provide the answers for it. That's what makes it unattended. Everything's already been answered. The script will just feed it to the program when it's necessary, the install program. This is an example of the recovery partition. So that's for the factory reset that we were talking about. A lot of hardware manufacturers force this to be created. When you're installing the operating system, it carves out a portion of that hard drive and it makes a partition and it stores some recovery files there, so that if you press a special key or do a key combination, it can do a factory reset. If you're trying to do an upgrade for your install, you can do an in-place upgrade, like I mentioned before. That's when all of your files and programs, they stay in place. The only way you can pull that off, though, is if your current operating system is in the proper upgrade path for Windows 10. But if you can pull it off successfully, then that'll make your setup for your operating system way easier, because everything will already be there. All your files, all your most of your applications, all that stuff will be there already. And then for a clean install, you're basically wiping the hard drive or installing a new hard drive in the computer and you're installing Windows 10 from scratch. During your installation, if you're trying to, let's say you're trying to install the operating system, you're doing a clean installation, you're trying to install the operating system from a flash drive or even like a DVD or something like that, external hard drive. Sometimes you'll have to go into the BIOS or the UEFI, and you'll have to change the boot device priority. So basically, you have to change the order that your computer looks in when it's trying to turn the operating system on. Because if that system already has an operating system and I'm trying to get rid of it, but the first thing that it checks is the hard drive, the internal hard drive, I'm never going to get a chance to kick off my new installation, because every time the system boots, it's going to immediately go to the hard drive where the current operating system is, and it's going to load it up. So what you'll have to do is you'll have to interrupt that boot up process. So during post, you'll press a key like F2 or F12 or something. It'll interrupt the boot process, and it'll take me to the BIOS, which will then give me an option to say, hey, I want instead of booting to the hard drive, internal hard drive first, I want to boot to this USB drive or boot to this DVD or what have you. And then that gives your install files a chance to kick off. And then you can run your installation. Speaking of interrupted boots, these are some of the startup modes that you can get into using those interrupted boots. Usually the interrupted boot process for Windows, you're going to press some F key. Here they're talking about the F8 key. The F8 key will allow you to enter several different modes. They have a safe mode, which is used for diagnostics, because what it'll do is it won't load up all of the high fancy features that your operating system could take advantage of. Instead, it loads the most basic drivers and basic functions that the operating system has. That way, you can remove those as potential issues on your system. They also have a safe mode with networking, so you can still have your network connections. And then they have a safe mode that's only command prompt, so you can remove the graphical user interface or the GUI out as being an issue. There's also an option called last known good configuration. So let's say you're doing something, messing around with configurations, your operating system, and you change something and it messes up the computer. If you reboot and then F8 and then choose that last known good configuration option, it'll roll you back to the previous time that your computer booted up successfully, and it'll take back the settings back in time to how your computer was set up at that point. And then it's basically a good way of undoing something that you just did. And then in Windows 8 and 10, the startup modes have been extended. Both Windows 8 and 10, they can boot pretty quick, too quick to use F8. So instead, you can hold down Shift key and then select the restart option in the power menu to display these options on the screen for you to choose from. Pretty much the same ones we saw before, with a few more exceptions, but you don't have to sit there and spam the F8 key. You can just hold down that.